As you all know, the Australian government released that draft EIS in mid-October. And as you all know, that draft EIS is supposed to look at potential impacts on the community and the environment. The problem is, it doesn't. It simply doesn't do what it was meant to do. Instead, as Bob Debus said tonight, it reads as a catalogue of errors, the most glaring of which I'll bring to your attention and to the attention of the Council. As I've said publicly previously, there is nothing but uncertainty at every turn when it comes to this EIS, and quite frankly, the lack of detail in the document is astounding. You would not let us get away with something like that. With some of the decisions we have to make, if we presented a report to you with a lack of detail that's in this, you would not let us get away with it. Key issues. Little things that might be relevant to an airport like aircraft noise. Flight paths, because they're indicative only. Traffic, maybe, should rate a bit of an analysis. Maybe transport's something that could be addressed in the EIS. The environment might be something that perhaps the government could have turned its mind to. Potentially negative economic impacts might have registered a thought. But all of these have been either ill-considered or poorly addressed in that joke of a document we refer to as a draft EIS. That draft is nothing but a rush job, a con job and a shonk job, and it does not even meet the government's own guidelines for an EIS. Did you know it was done in just 8 months when the last one took 2.5 years? Does that indicate that maybe it was done according to a political timeline rather than an EIS timeline? Is this just another captain's call that should go the way of knights and dames, I wonder? We knew it was fast-tracked, and this has now been proven by the joke of a document that we've been handed and by the independent review that was undertaken by Wesrock and by this council and which is before you tonight. Both have identified numerous blatant omissions, some of which I've just referred to. I've got to say to you folks, the council also believes that 60 days to respond to an EIS is not long enough. It is not long enough to consider such a complex document that can have such dramatic impacts on our community. And as Councillor Fell said memorably at our last meeting, we gave you more with green bins. This is sloppy, and it shows, frankly, a complete disregard for you and for the rest of the people in Western Sydney. I don't support any airport at Badgerys Creek, and I never will. I came here, how long ago, Daniel? All right, long time ago. I was elected a long time ago. I think it must be 16 years ago. And we opposed it then. We oppose it now, lock, stock and barrel. It's a bad idea and it should never happen. As has been said tonight, there's been no attempt at all to model or test different flight path options, which, get this, the Australian government's own guidelines say an EIS should do. They didn't do it. They should have done it according to their own guidelines and just didn't bother. One wonders why. And we know that noise impacts were not even taken into consideration when they planned the current flight paths, or they wouldn't have them sitting 4,000 feet above our community. Residential impacts not discussed. Mitigation measures not quantified. The merge point, a new term, places an unfair burden on the people of the Blue Mountains and must be, not reviewed, eradicated. We just cannot have an airport operating like this one 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, placing a burden on you and our environment it is not on. And I want to ask you this question. Why should one Sydney airport bear the burden of a curfew and not another? As Councillor Lucchetti said last time we were here, is it that the bogans don't deserve a curfew? Is that what it's about? I'd prefer to say the hippies, but that's just me. I feel more like a hippie than a bogan. If you get that on one of my 3 phones, Robert. The experts also tell us that the entire review of all flight movements within the Sydney Basin should have been looked at and conducted. You'd think that was pretty obvious. Didn't happen. We also know the EIS is based, as Libby said, and this is where the Upper Mountains come into it, and she's dead right. They're based on the first 5 years of operation, stage 1 only. Have a look at stage 2, when they put in that second runway, and that second, more hideous merge point appears above the Upper Mountains. And that's why we say, in this submission, no EIS can be properly considered when it only deals with stage 1, because what it does is it ignores, I'd say deliberately, the impacts on the Upper Blue Mountains. Not on. These government officials focus on the predicted passenger levels when they're at their lowest in the first 5 years, equal to an airport the size of Townsville. But, and Libby made the point, when the second runway and passenger numbers are at their peak, around 80 million passenger movements annually, 80 million passenger movements annually, we're dealing with an airport busier than Heathrow and more like Dubai, not analysed. The Australian government is planning to bring a mega airport to our doorstep without giving us the facts that we need to make a proper assessment of its likely impacts. Now, the Deputy Prime Minister, and I want to spend some time on him if I may. I'm not a fan. I shan't vote for him. The Deputy Prime Minister argues that these flight paths are only preliminary and indicative. He has said that there will be an opportunity, as has been said tonight, to review these flight paths in 8 years' time, just before the airport's scheduled to start operations. Go back to the barricades, don't campaign, it's okay. Just before the planes start flying and after it's built, then we'll look at these flight paths and then we'll make an assessment about whether or not they're just indicative or real. Don't know about you, but I'm not feeling too comfortable. Now, everybody, I'm not one to treat with rumours. Anybody who knows me knows I hate gossip. Shut up, councillors. But if the rumours are right, and sometimes they are, the Deputy Prime Minister, the person who has carriage of this proposal, may be looking to announce his retirement from politics in January. How can someone in the departure lounge of Parliament guarantee there'll be another opportunity for comment? I'm not feeling confident, ladies and gentlemen. And there is no such statement in the EIS either about his retirement or indeed about the fact that we get another say just before the planes start flying. Not in the EIS, not feeling confident. So can you imagine the tarmacs built, The buildings are constructed, the lights and everything are dazzling away, planes are humming on the tarmac, getting ready for that first day of operations, and then they're going to consult with us about the flight paths. I'm not thinking that is something we should accept. Tourism, surprisingly, one operator thinks that I'm a socialist, and they're right, is one of our largest industries, and it is the economic powerhouse of this region. It is the lifeblood of our small businesses too. In the year to June 2015, we had 3.5 million visitors to our mountains, and they spent over $500 million here. The total value to our local economy by the tourism sector is estimated to be at over $195 million, with 13% of our jobs, 13%, based on tourism, with other key sectors such as retail trade being dependent on tourism. Millions of people from across the planet come here to Australia to visit our special and unique place with its outstanding values. We are one of only 2 cities in the world, 2 cities in the whole world within a World Heritage listed area. And the Blue Mountains National Park has the highest visitation of any national park in Australia. Our towns, our community depend on tourism. And whether it's visiting a health spa, whether it's bushwalking, whether it's camping, people will be forced to choose. People will be forced to choose whether they pursue these activities under a flight path or select a quieter location elsewhere. You and I go back a way, a long way. And I'm going to take your point, because you are right, as you often are, always are. Who will come and camp under a flight path that operates 24/7? We know that the number of visitors to this region increased when we got World Heritage status. Chris, Daniel, we were here. We know it will decrease if we lose it. The EIS states that there'll be no real impacts on the visitors to the Greater Blue Mountains World Heritage Area. That is a lie. I'm getting a cold because my voice keeps going up when I punch out. That is a lie. That is a lie. And that's a lie based on the dBA noise levels alone. But this assertion does not consider the way in which people use the national park. We know, you all know, it's the natural quiet that people expect to experience when they visit. And international research shows what we already know, that recreational park users value the natural quiet and as a result are more sensitive to noise intrusion. Experiencing the natural quiet is part of the visitor experience to the Blue Mountains. And a 2011 US study found that 95% of respondents thought providing a natural quiet environment where the sounds of nature were dominant was the important factor in visiting a national park. One of the greatest experiences I've had as mayor was to spend time with the Dalai Lama when he came here. And one of the key reasons our city was chosen for a retreat for advanced Buddhist teaching by His Holiness was in recognition of this special beauty and tranquility. You know, that fact speaks to the value placed on the Blue Mountains globally. That when the Dalai Lama was looking for somewhere to come for that retreat, He picked here. Would he pick here with planes 24/7? We can't afford to put this at risk. And that's why I wonder when that person said that I shouldn't be doing this, these people shouldn't all be doing this, what they're talking about. Because this is their businesses too. Now, noise impacts weren't really looked at as part of the EIS, should have been, may have occurred to the government to have a little look at that. An additional research commissioned by your council suggests that when assessing aircraft noise intrusion in natural settings, it is not appropriate to do this on the basis of noise levels alone. Noise in quiet settings, such as ours, need to be understood in the context of that quiet soundscape. It isn't like the inner city. It's different. The soundscape is different. And we get the low level noise because the planes are landing, and frequent low level noise occurrences in natural settings also need to be taken into consideration, were not. The EIS found, or has been found, to be wanting when it comes to the impacts on wildlife. The EIS has claimed that wildlife will become desensitised to noise. The quolls won't mind. The wallabies will not worry after a couple of months, nor will the bird life. Well, we've had a look, and we've identified more recent research, than that which was laughably used in the EIS. And what it shows is that an increase in noise levels leads to changes in animal behaviour and changes in animal distribution. Guess what it also shows? It also shows that rises in background noise for animals can lead to an impact on the masking of signals for communication, navigation, prey detection, predator avoidance, and environmental monitoring. It is just rubbish to say that the animals will get used to it. It would be wrong of a mayor to say publicly that something was bullshit, so I will not. You know, I reckon air quality is important, but the EIS doesn't. Air quality at both the local and regional level in the long term was identified in the draft EIS as a concern, but something that ought to be passed over. But levels exceed acceptable standards for nitrogen dioxide, PM2.5, PM10, which is particulate matter, and I'm very worried with some PhDs in the room when I say this, and ozone, for example. Air quality, as has been said tonight, is already a major concern for Western Sydney. This airport is going to impact on that. It's going to impact on that dramatically. And to pass it over and gloss it over actually puts people's health at risk, as has been said tonight, and that is inexcusable. In 1999, when there was last talk of an airport at Badgerys Creek, the World Heritage Listing nomination, did you know, was deferred as a direct result? Did you know that? We know that UNESCO had very serious concerns about the potential impacts of an airport on what is now the Greater Blue Mountains World Heritage Area. And alarmingly, these concerns have not been addressed in the draft EIS. And they pose a real threat. They did then, they will now. The natural quiet, the visual spectacle are important characteristics of our region, and UNESCO cited both of these as important when it granted World Heritage status. The draft EIS states that noise levels below 50 dPa in the Greater World Heritage National Park are not significant. Well, colleagues, we think otherwise. We think this statement is rubbish. We think this statement has not been sufficiently justified, and in fact it represents significant and widespread impact on the World Heritage Area. It's got to. And UNESCO thought so in 1999. As Bob Debus said tonight, only 2 years ago we celebrated the 15-year anniversary of the World Heritage listing. I hope we get to celebrate it in 15 years' time. Council last week welcomed the news that the New South Wales Government is in the final stage of approving the Blue Mountains Local Environment Plan, a blueprint document that guides land use across the city. We didn't think we'd get there, but we did. And the new LEP and the staff over there who were responsible for it, that greeny lefty document you put together that nearly didn't get there, the new LEP will continue to protect and manage many of the special characteristics of the natural and built environment of the Blue Mountains, which are clearly valued by all of you, only to be threatened by this airport. Why did we bother? Well, I'm glad we bothered. Well, every one of you here tonight, each person, knows and understands what an exceptionally beautiful place the Blue Mountains is. You know and understand why it needs to be preserved and protected for everyone to enjoy. Every one of you knows that. But equally important, this is also our place in which we live, in which we work. It's a place of economic enterprise. It's a place where ordinary people, families and community go about their daily lives, and it is the place of our First Peoples. As a council, we say this: the draft EIS is grossly inadequate, considering that the Western Sydney Airport is the most significant proposal affecting the livability of Western Sydney for the next century. We say this: the Minister for the Environment should reject the draft EIS, and as a result, this airport should not be approved. We say this: that we will be assessing our opposition to the significant and irreversible impacts on the Blue Mountains environment and on our community that will occur if this thing goes ahead, and we will not stop fighting. We say this: that the Minister for the Environment, the Honourable Greg Hunt, needs to seek advice from UNESCO now regarding the potential impacts of this proposition on our World Heritage Area. And we say this: we will be endorsing the submission made by the First Peoples of the City of Blue Mountains through the Aboriginal Advisory Council and supporting it fully. And we say, this isn't good enough. And quite frankly, both the Blue Mountains And although some councils in Western Sydney don't want to speak up for their communities, we will. Western Sydney should not have this airport. Thank you.
Western Sydney Airport will have no curfew, unlike Mascot, which means the older, noisier freight planes will be using this airport 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. If Western Sydney Airport cannot be built without its flight paths impacting over the Blue Mountains towns and villages, a World Heritage area, and other Sydney airports, then this site is not really suitable for an airport. Much has been said about the lack of rail transport to Western Sydney Airport initially. However, rail can play an important role in reducing demand for air transport. At present, Melbourne, Canberra and Brisbane are the only interstate destinations that can be conveniently reached by rail from Sydney. However, a 4 a.m. arrival time in Brisbane is not really user-friendly. While the Hume, Federal and now the Pacific Highways have seen major reconstruction projects, the corresponding rail routes to these cities have only seen minor improvements and still follow steam age alignments with speed restrictions. The rail line from Maitland to Brisbane is largely single track with passing loops. When the Hume Highway between Macarthur and Mittagong and Goulburn and Yass were rerouted, opportunities were missed to also reroute parts of the Sydney-Melbourne rail line in these new alignments. And quite actually, the line between Goulburn and Yass actually is good for line-side photographers because of its lovely curves. You can get really nice shots of trains on those curves. Okay, and as a result, rail is not competitive with time-conscious travellers. Over the last 30 years, there have been proposals for a very fast train from Sydney to Melbourne via Canberra, which would slash the travel time between Sydney and Melbourne to a little over 3 hours. However, these proposals have not got off the drawing board as successive governments have taken fright at the high cost of providing this technology. However, there is an alternative, which is tilt train technology. This technology has been embraced by the Queensland Government for its North Coast Railway line from Brisbane to Cairns. If a tilt train technology coupled with track and alignment improvements was used on the Sydney-Melbourne route, the travel time could be reduced to a little over 6 hours instead of almost 11. You can actually drive to Melbourne with breaks in 9.5 hours from Glenbrook. Another thing to consider is we've got no guarantee what a future government may do of Kingsford Smith. I mean, the site's worth a lot of money, actually. What's to stop a future government actually closing Kingsford Smith and moving all air operations out to Western Sydney Airport? I mean, the 2 railway stations at Kingsford Smith could easily be adapted to other uses. So that's something you're going to need to consider. There's no guarantee what a future government may do with Kingsford Smith Airport. In conclusion, a 24 hours 7 airport at Badgerys Creek will have a negative impact on Blue Mountains residents through noise pollution, effects on sleep and the effects of aircraft emissions.
As we know, this airport is planned to be right next door to us and our World Heritage area. I might actually wait a moment.
Stop the clock. Just stop, wind the clock back to 5 if we would.
Oh.
The seconder has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will start from the beginning. Thanks for your attendance tonight, and thanks for all the wonderful speeches that we've heard already. I don't think I can really add much, but I do want to talk about a couple of things. First, the airport, as we all know, is right next door to us and our World Heritage area. For me, the box that says will not adversely affect a World Heritage area is the first box that must be ticked. End of discussion. As we all know, the draft EIS does not tick that box. It pays lip service to that box. As we also know, people worked very hard over a very long period to gain World Heritage status for us. That listing is not lightly bestowed, and as we know, it can be lost. It can be removed from us. So that listing here should be treated in the cavalier manner in which it has been treated by the EIS, I think is simply outrageous. Outrageous. We have It is our responsibility. We've been given the responsibility to look after that land, to care for it, to maintain it. And that responsibility is right at the top of our list of responsibilities. It's not the only thing at the top, but it's at the top. And there is no development that is so important that that responsibility can be ignored or downgraded. So for me, that is straight off an automatic no to the draft EIS and no to the airport. My second point is a little diversion. I'd like to take a short tour through the predictions on which the idea that we need another airport is based. I suspect, like many of you, have quite a deep instinctive distrust of predictions that stretch out for anything more than about 10 years. Call me cynical, but anyway. And now I have to thank Jeff Bennett, who is, I believe, still in the room, for providing me with a deal of the following information. Now, the draft EIS uses the Sydney Airport Master Plan from 2009 and the 2012 Joint Study on Aviation Capacity in the Sydney region. That's the basis it uses to tell us that we are going to need another airport. The master plan that was done in 2015, which is in fact the latest, much more recent master plan, has different figures altogether. For instance, its prediction of growth by 2029, which is the same point that the 2009 master plan went to, its prediction is 15% lower in terms of aircraft movements than the 2009 master plan was. It says this is made primarily because of the GFC. It forecasts an annual aircraft movement growth of 1.4%, and it concludes that Sydney Airport does in fact have scope to grow until beyond 2033. And just for a reality check on that, the latest passenger aircraft movement figures, this is the sum of arrivals and departures at Sydney, between June 2014 and June 2015, grew by 0.1%. 0.1. This is even with the 2015 master plan saying it predicted 1.4%. The previous one predicted about 3.4%. So even with a lower prediction of 1.4, the facts are still 0.1. You will not be surprised that I remain distrustful of the predictions for Sydney Airport, or the predictions that Sydney Airport will be full and there will be no possibility of growth and we will need another airport. No, not going for it. And that's without discussing whether there will be any, increase in oil prices or recessions or any other things like that that might affect it. So I think I will, in fact, pretty much stop there. For me, amongst all the other things that people have said, all of which I agree with, the World Heritage Area being something is entirely non-negotiable for me. The need for a second airport is very much up in the air for me. And because of those two things, from me, you get no airport. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, we are a community of individuals, and it is we, the people, that we are able to make a difference. Throughout this entire process, our community has been united, and we have stood firm despite the different political banners we fly. This is the only way that we will achieve any outcome. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. The Blue Mountains community has been let down by the bureaucrats of the Department of Infrastructure and Regional Development. The Canberra Machine's planned flight paths merging over Blaxland are a complete betrayal, and we shouldn't accept this. And judging by tonight's turnout, Mr. Mayor, we don't. I don't believe that the current EIS satisfies the need of the Blue Mountains community, and in particular, my residents of Ward 4. The residents of Ward 4 will bear the brunt of this burden, and it is unacceptable. It is unacceptable that the Canberra Machine believes that it can just dump this EIS in our laps and we'll accept it. It is unacceptable to believe that this is the best that they can do. It's unfortunate to read the Deputy Prime Minister's statement about our concerns on this issue. It looks good to begin with, it reads well, says nice, promising things, then slowly evolves from a promising story about addressing our concerns and changing flight paths to taking a more Stephen King approach. Thank you. The main issue I have with the Deputy Prime Minister's statement is just one line. One line ruined it all. And I quote, "I can assure you that the government will work with the community and listen to its concerns before settling the flight paths and airspace management arrangements, which will occur nearer to when the airport commences services." Mr. Mayor, this is a statement from a Nationals MP that is contemplating his retirement. He won't be here when the flight paths will be determined again. Instead, the Deputy Prime Minister should instruct his bureaucrats in his department to fix this mess that they created, and he can retire with a clear conscience. And I conclude, Mr. Mayor, that bad government caused this to happen. Bad government will continue to cause these issues. The Canberra machine and career politicians like those that have thrust the CIS upon us have failed to stand up for the interests of their own people, and it is up to us, the community, to stop the Canberra machine.
Because Mark has said everything, and I totally agree with what he said, and he's an eloquent speaker, I'm going to change my tact a little bit, and I want to talk about the airport layout and what indicative means. When you read through the report and you read through the EIS, everything is indicative. The draft EIS, for stage 1, and when the government or the bureaucrats decide who the ALC is, the airport lease company is going to be. Is it going to be the present operators of the Kingsford Smith Airport, the Macquarie Bank, and what impact will they have? Because not only are the flight paths indicative, also the runways. We've only got one at the present moment, the southwest northeast runway layout. What are they going to do? What input will the ALC have through this whole process? We have been given guarantees that by the Deputy Prime Minister, and I was at that meeting when he virtually said that to me, that we will look at do a complete new EIS for the flight paths. And I have since been informed that they do that on a regular basis. About every 5 years, the flight paths are looked at for Kingsford Smith. But in this whole process, you've got 4 airports. You've got a military one, you've got Bankstown, you've got Camden, and you've got Kingsford Smith. The flight paths were just made to see whether the airport would work. And this concerns me because they haven't looked at the whole of the Sydney Basin. We are going to become Badgerys Creek is going to become 24/7. And at a meeting in the Sydney Airport Forum, a question was asked, and I didn't know this, of the people from Air Services who look after the flight paths, about the airport curfew. Did you know that the airport curfew is in legislation? And that legislation says when Badgerys Creek is open, that Kingsford Smith will no longer take any late night flights. As an emergency or anything like that, they all have to go to Badgerys Creek. That's what the legislation says. So this is unfair to the residents of the Blue Mountains. Look, Mark has basically said everything. I am opposed to it. I will be forever and a day. I moved to the mountains in the early 70s. I have raised my family here, and I have lived here, and I've run my business here. This is my home. A quiet part of the world. I moved out of Parramatta to come here. I want to keep it that way, and I will do everything in my power to carry on doing it that way.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. We are approaching the Blackstone merge point and will be touching down at Western Sydney Airport in less than 5 minutes. On disembarking the aircraft, you may be surprised to learn that there is in fact no rail link to the Sydney CBD. And you'll need to make that 65-kilometre journey by road as best you can. Never mind, the government has kindly upgraded our road infrastructure, so now more of you can more efficiently congest the motorways as you compete with the thousands of extra fuel tankers. And now as we pass over Blaxland, do continue to enjoy the breathtaking views of the former World Heritage listed Blue Mountains. For those on the right-hand side of the aircraft, you will be enjoying iconic views of the Blue Labyrinth and beyond to the sandstone cliffs of the Jamison Escarpment. On the left-hand side of the aircraft, you would normally have a perfect view of the once popular Euroka Clearing, although it tends to be a little smoggy these days. And now as we make our final turn over Sydney's once pristine water catchment area, a timely reminder to stock up on bottled water. Cabin crew, please be seated for landing. Mr Mayor, what is proposed in this EIS is a disgrace. We want birds, not Boeings, over Blaxland. We want fresh air, not Airbuses, over our national park. And we want quietness, not Qantas, in our mountains. Whether we grew up in the mountains or choose to move here, like I did, most of us have a reasonable expectation that the night hours will be quieter than if we were living in the city. And generally, we expect to be able to enjoy a certain level of tranquility in and around our homes at all times of the day because we live within a national park. It's known as amenity, Mr Mayor, amenity. In fact, the draft EIS mentions the word amenity 321 times and also concedes that an airport would change the amenity of our communities and our recreational areas, and that aircraft noise is one of the most sensitive issues. Well, thank you, Captain Obvious. I'll conclude with a quick look at some of the reasons why other airport sites have been rejected in the past and propose the question, why then Badgerys Creek? Towra Point in Botany Bay ruled out, environmental difficulties. Galston ruled out, not environmentally feasible. Duffy's Forest ruled out, potential negative impact on Ku-ring-gai Chase National Park. Holsworthy ruled out, possibility of contaminating Warrenora catchment area. Well, guess what, folks? Badgery Creek site achieves the Quinella. Close proximity to National Park and closer proximity to a water catchment area than Holsworthy. Add to this the ludicrous flight path proposals and we have the trifecta for environmental disaster. Make no mistake, whatever proposal is chosen for flight paths that track over any part of the mountains, we all lose. Residents, tourists, businesses, the environment. We will all be negatively impacted. This is a mountains-wide issue, and as such, we must remain galvanised and united in opposing 24/7 aircraft flight paths over the Blue Mountains, and let Canberra know loud and clear this airport won't fly. So if it's not entirely obvious by now, I support the motion.
Let me begin by saying how stunned I am by the timing of this whole charade. Firstly, we get a camera call of who's who announcing what great builders of infrastructure they are by announcing they're going to build an airport at Badgerys Creek. The cart is now before the horse being the EIS. But we can't put corks back into champagne bottles, can we? So the EIS is completed in record time and surprises no one by reporting that everything is awesome. Just to make sure that no one finds any problems with this warp speed endorsement, the community is given 61 days to process and write a submission on, by my reckoning, 4,298 pages of at times highly technical information. Oh, and do it in the lead up to Christmas. And no, we won't give you an extension, even if this is a really significant development that has dramatic lifestyle ramifications for whole towns, villages, suburbs, indeed a city. Do you get the feeling that they do not want any white noise? That they are actively discouraging scrutiny? We are alert and alarmed. This is like having to read 4 volumes of Game of Thrones in 2 months without the sex and violence. Although there was plenty of horror, and the violence will arrive as an assault on our ears if this proposal proceeds in its current form. Our community has machine-gunned holes in the document. It has been amended whilst under exhibition because of the gunners in our ranks. Without question, it should be revised and re-exhibited. Our home is on UNESCO's World Heritage List because of its outstanding universal value, for its unique habitats and plant communities and recreation, tourism, wilderness, scenic and aesthetic values. The draft EIS concluded that there will be no significant impact upon the Greater Blue Mountains World Heritage Area and its World Heritage values, and that the airport and its operation would not result in attributes of the World Heritage Area being lost, degraded, damaged or notably altered, modified, obscured or diminished. Further, that it would have no significant impact on recreation or tourism values. This is creative writing, pure fiction. The authors clearly have no affinity for wilderness experiences, or perhaps they lived with Darryl Kerrigan, such as their enthusiasm to diminish the impact of aircraft and aircraft noise on a landscape. Further, it is suggested that 50 to 60 decibels is acceptable background noise in a wilderness area. Really? A cliff-top solitude at dawn and an Airbus at 1,500 metres. How gloriously meditative. And here is the thing. The lower mountains, which is going to cop the brunt of the audio-visual assault in Stage 1, was not even used in modelling of the impacts on sensitive areas. In being told that everything will be fine in the Blue Mountains, all the sites used to assess and model impacts were in the upper mountains. It clearly escapes the authors that the Blue Mountains extend south of Wentworth Falls, and that our ability to enjoy all the grandeur and beauty of the lower mountains has been completely overlooked. This affects tourism too. Think Glenbrook on a Saturday, all the bike riders returning from riding the Woodford to Glenbrook Fire Trail, all the families who come up to enjoy a gathering at Euroka Clearing. Think of all the trail runners, bushwalkers, picnickers and campers, both local and tourist alike, who love the tranquility and beauty of the lower mountains nature experience. Ruined and not even acknowledged or mentioned in the EIS. Here's another gem. There is little potential for the proposed airport to directly affect the Aboriginal cultural values of the Greater Blue Mountains area. Contrast this to Chris Tobin's views. Contrast this to the views of all the Darug Gundungurra traditional owners of the land, and the extent of the problems with this ticker box document truly start to emerge. They found, this is the traditional owners, that the impacts of this proposal on both culture and country to be both distressing and disconcerting, and they found 13 significant issues that they have with what is planned, and they're summarised in the council business paper. To the merge point concept, reportedly best practice in airways architecture. Tell that to the people who will be living underneath it. On paper, it looks like a water slide at Wet and Wild. If it comes into being over Blaxland, the people will be deaf and wild, or maybe deaf and tired.
Councillor's time has expired.
To conclude, the flaws in this document have been well exposed. Our communities and our World Heritage Wilderness status are gravely threatened by the subjective conclusions drawn in the EIS. The test now lies with Minister Hunt and Deputy Prime Minister Truss, who will receive this document. They acknowledge those weaknesses and fundamental shortcomings and thus reject it outright. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's just absolutely appalling. And the situation where these planes are going to be coming over here, coming over Blaxland, hitting that merge point at such a low altitude, only 4,000 feet above the ground here, supported by this incredible EIS, which just has to be seen as an absolute farrago of fictions. And that's the view not just of people who feel directly affected and who could be accused of some degree, I guess, of NIMBYism by some people. It's the view, and I speak as a director of the Western Sydney Regional Organisation of Councils, which I'm a director of along with Councillor Miles. That organisation employed a company to do a peer review of the EIS. The company employed was Parsons Brinckerhoff. And they had to, of course, provide information back to WesRock in a very short period of time. WesRock then provided that information to the local councils, the constituent councils, and that's now available to the public. At various meetings, employees of Parsons Brinckerhoff and associated consultants have just expressed absolute amazement. The shortcomings have been quoted chapter and verse here. I'm not going to go through them again, but we'd ask them a question, you know, what do they say about this? And Parsons Brinckerhoff would say, well, they say this, but it's really funny because we can't find out how it's supported. There are no agreed modelling procedures have gone through. The models they've used have not necessarily been peer reviewed. They're not. They don't have the approval throughout the industry. They're just absolute assertions. And I think most of us who've been speaking have been saying that, and it's absolutely true. Parsons Brinckerhoff are not some rank outsiders. Parsons Brinckerhoff did the original EIS for in the late 90s for the original proposal. They did it over a course of 2.5 years, of course. They didn't try to get it all done in 8 months, but they just cannot believe that this EIS is being used to support such a potentially disastrously impacting proposal. The 8-week submission period's been referred to. It was mentioned that it's less time than we gave people to comment on the green bins. That's true. It is, however, refreshingly 2 weeks longer than we give people to comment on a carport. So there you go, it fits somewhere into that range of things. I mean, this is only going to bring all the incoming flights over the mountains, going to merge them over Blaxland, and what my mother-in-law has done to deserve that, I don't know. But she's going to cop it, and the other members of a book reading club that meet there. A 24/7 airport, no curfew, and this is the impact that this is going to have is just enormous. We're talking about an airport which is not some minor airport. This is an airport that's going to be bigger than Dubai eventually, 80 million passenger movements per annum. And all of that is going to be thrust upon us with this EIS as the only thing underpinning it. And we're told, well, don't worry too much. The flight paths, for instance, are a proof of concept. That's fine. They may not be the paths that are eventually put in place. Okay, I can accept that. I'll tell you when I'll accept it. When Greg Hunt, Warren Truss and Louise Marcus come out and say that they are totally off the table. That's when I'll believe it. And I will not believe it before then. And even then I would have some... I just don't support the airport at all. But I don't see why we can't have at least those assurances right now, with no argument whatsoever. Anyway, as I say, I support the motion.
Go back to early 2013, January 2013, and I received an invitation to attend a meeting in Parramatta. I was the mayor at the time, and I consulted with my deputy, who is the esteemed mayor now. And I said, guess what? I've got an invitation to go to Parramatta to the Western Sydney Business Chamber. They want to talk to us about an airport. And he said, go. So I did. And they said some very interesting things, the Western Sydney Business Chamber. They said, don't worry about this Wilton thing that's happening at the moment, and it was. The Wilton EIS was out, and there was discussion about whether Wilton should be Sydney's second airport. Don't worry about that, they said. This is the Business Chamber. And they had senior bureaucrats from the Department of Infrastructure and Regional Development in the room with them while they said these things. So I thought, this is a little bit strange. These bureaucrats are outwardly gunning for an airport, and they wanted at Badgerys Creek, and they're saying not to worry about the EIS that their own government is and state government is preparing at this very time. This is a strange circumstance. The same bureaucrats are the ones that you're giving your submissions to at this very minute. This process is dodgy. This process lacks political scrutiny. This process, as Councillor Christie says, is being run by a Canberra machine. And this process is not being given the scrutiny by the relevant minister, being the Deputy Prime Minister of this country, Warren Truss, who I didn't realise may be on the verge of retirement, but whether he is or he isn't, this process is not being looked at by the people that are supposed to, the elected officials who are supposed to take care of it and take care of us. So I call on the Deputy Prime Minister to take charge of this situation, because it is unacceptable for all the reasons that we have heard, and as much has been said, it still only basically touches on all of the problems that this EIS has, because wherever you look in it, Wherever you know something about an issue and you look in the EIS to see how it's been investigated, the answers are not there. Let's follow on from that. So the meeting about the EIS happened. The EIS was released in October and we had an invitation to go to Parramatta to have a briefing on it. Same building, same room. And I think I might actually have sat in the same seat as I had a couple of years previously trying to find out what was going on. You know, you can say that it's rigged and you'd be right. Councillor Vanderklay raised the issue having knowledge of bushfire matters, and he said, well, what about if we're doing hazard reductions by fire? What about if there's a bushfire? How will that affect the impact on the airport? We can't find anything in your EIS about that. Don't worry, they said. The planes will fly over the smoke. And Councillor Vanderklay said, no, what I'm saying is, what about if we want to do hazard reduction too, because we're in the most fire-prone place in the world, what if we want to do hazard reduction at the RFS? And they still didn't get it. They said, no, don't worry, the planes will fly over the smoke. I kid you not, I promise you, that Chris was there. And representatives of other councils as well. Then finally they got it and they said, oh, look, don't worry about it, you know, winds, I said, well, the prevailing winds are from the west, so it'll push said smoke towards your airport. How's this going to work? We can't find it in your EIS. Don't worry about it. We'll take it on board, take it on board. And in fact, I think the same minister, Deputy Prime Minister, has written back and said that those concerns, in his view, are unfounded. I forget the wording he used, but he certainly said that it wasn't something we should worry about. That's not good enough either. Briefly, I just want to talk about tourism, and I'd posit to you a question. Were you dying of the death of 1,000 cuts? Which one is the fatal one? This is the death of 1,000 cuts for the Blue Mountains tourism industry. And Mark, I know, or Mr Mayor, I know the reference you've made, that anyone in the tourism industry would think that this is a good thing with planes going over currently and think that more is a positive thing for the industry. I think they're kidding themselves. And one day they'll look up and say, you know what? All these planes, we're not getting the visitation we used to. It must be some other reason. We'll go and look for some other. It'll be all too late. All too late. It is the death of 1,000 cuts, or the death of 1,000 planes, or the death of 1,000 whatevers you want to talk about. But at the end of it all, this is the biggest threat to our quality of life in this region's history, in this city's history. And if we don't stand together and all fight common cause, and we are certainly on this council and we are in this community, then we're going to get the bodgy, black and gold version of an airport, the cheapest and nastiest airport that these federal bureaucrats can foist on us and then are going to spend 15, 20, 30 years building for themselves, then that's what we're going to get. So fire up.